Hey, what's up everyone? This is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. Welcome to the channel. In this video, we're going to be producing some Future Rave. For those of you who are not aware, Future Rave is a style and genre or a subgenre of EDM that's been mostly popular and brought to the scene by David Guetta and Morten. The style is a little bit of a mixture of techno and progressive house, focusing a lot on the aggressive, arpeggiated leads and really fat, saw-heavy bass lines. So I'm going to play something that I'm working on and highlight throughout this video some key principles that you can apply when trying to create music in this genre. All right, so let's start with the arpeggiated synth that we can hear in the drop. Now, before I get into the sound design, I want to focus in on the pattern. I also want to share with you a principle that can be really helpful no matter what genre of music that you are creating. So let's double click this region and let's hit the fold button here so we can focus in on just the notes that are being played. Now, this pattern was played by hand on my MIDI controller. And what I did was I slowed the tempo down of my project because we're currently at 124 BPMs. And at that tempo, it could be really tricky to play a pattern with my MIDI controller. So what I often do is I'll slow it down dramatically. So from 124, let's say all the way down to something like 92 BPMs. And I'm literally just recording by hand that specific pattern, note by note. Now, it is very helpful to have things slow down dramatically so that you can play and articulate the pattern and riff and the overall melody that you're looking for, then speed it up so that you can find the right pocket and see if that riff makes sense at that tempo. Sometimes when you do this, the riffs and patterns don't translate well, and that's because we have to be mindful that when we are playing something a lot slower, the subdivisions. So you don't want to play something, even though you're playing it slower, you are also performing that riff slower as well. So knowing that, now it's perfectly fine if you're drawing in the notes too. This has just been a helpful thing for me personally that I like to do that helps me create the right type of patterns that I'm looking for. Also, when you're trying to create patterns, you can start by just the rhythmic pattern first. And then by using the scale feature in Ableton Live or in any DAW, you can use programs that allow you to see what notes belong in the scale. Then you can kind of identify and move notes around. So let me give you an example. Here on this track, I'm in my session view. So I'm just going to create a blank clip right here. This is going to give me a 1-bar clip. And what we can do is just create a simple rhythmic pattern. And I'll use the pencil tool to draw this in. It'll be a lot easier. And once I draw my first note, I'll hit the fold button. That way it's just focusing on that one note. That way I can draw in my pattern without having to go to multiple different notes. Now I'm going to go ahead and preview this pattern that I'm creating. So once you come up with a pattern that you would like, go ahead and hit the scale button. And in this case, we'll be in, let's say, G sharp, minor. And then we'll hit scale. And this will give us all the notes that belong in that scale. So you can simply now just take your pattern and identify some notes that you want to try messing with. And so on and so on. So these can be really helpful when you're trying to identify the notes that you're trying to lock into a specific pattern. All right, now over to the sound. So we're going to be using Serum to create the sound patch here. And I'm using oscillator A, I have that set to analog, and using basic MIDI wavetable. I've got it set to the first one. And I'm going to repeat the same process for oscillator 2. So both are set to basic MIDI. And we're going to crank the unison on the second one to 5. We're going to add 5 voices in unison and just move the D tune slightly here. This is all really kind of just done by ear, and I'm slightly changing the fine tune here, about 32 cents, and adjusting the level. So this is just with oscillator A. And I'm going to slightly bring up the level of oscillator B. So it creates that nice stereo depth that we can hear and feel, widens up the sound a lot. Then we're heading over to the envelope because we want to actually shape the body of the sound. So this is really short leads. So you can see here, we've got the envelope and we've got the sustain all the way down and the decay right around here and just a really quick release. And then once we've got that set in place, I'm going to make sure I set the sound over to mono, from polyphonic to mono, so we don't have any overlaps. So we have distortion going on. I have it set to diode 1. And I'm really just kind of combing through some of these settings to feel like, okay, that's adding the right type of texture that I like. And then using the multi-band compression setting here. And that's what's really going to give that nice elastic, rubbery type of texture to the sound. And then just using an EQ to cover some of the bottom end here. And that's about it. I have some other plugins here, but as you can see, they're not turned on. They weren't being used. It was more trial and error. So once I've gotten that set in place, I'm actually going to be duplicating this track. So we have the main lead here, and I'm going to duplicate that track, same riffs underneath here, same serum. But in this case, all we're really using, we're turning both oscillators A and B off, and just using a compressor and the EQ effect here. But all we're using is the noise. I'm using the ARP, I'm going to analog, the ARP white noise here, because I just want this to be the actual same pattern, but just triggering the actual white noise. Now we could have added this in the first serum, but I want a little bit more control over the balance between the noise and the actual main synth. Now, what's really going to add the drama to this synth is the reverb and the space that you can often hear in a lot of future rave type of tracks. So as you can see, I've grouped all the synths up to a lead bus, and that's this track over here. And let's go ahead and focus on the processing here. So on this lead bus, I've created an effect rack because I wanted the dry signal and I still wanted to be able to blend a little bit of the affected reverb signal. So I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to focus in on the reverb signal. So here we have, I started with Valhalla Vintage Verb. Any reverb would do. Just want to make sure you're using a big, bright hall type of setting because we want a nice, luscious space there. And I'm going to follow that reverb over with a little bit of auto panning so there's actual some movement. And that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just adding this depth to the reverb. So that's just a little bit of that panning, EQing this so that we're not getting a lot of the muddiness that might come through and warming up the reverb as well. And then the most important aspect is side chaining the reverb to the actual lead itself, not necessarily the kick that we normally oftentimes do in dance music where you have the kick drum playing and you would use the kick as a source of the sidechain. Here, the source is going to actually be my main lead. So let's go ahead and take a listen. Just focusing on the reverb. And then what you want to do is dial the threshold up or down, lower the threshold, raise the threshold till you feel like you have a right balance there between the reverb and the dry signal. And then I'm actually just compressing it slightly with the glue compressor after that, just to actually control any rising peaks that might be a little out of control with the reverb. And so that's the affected reverb blending in with the dry. As you can see, the dry signal, there's nothing there. And the reverb has that on there. Then affecting both the dry and the reverb signal is a side chaining plugin by Nicky Romero called the Kickstart. That helps really create that nice pulse action. And then I'm going to be using Ableton Live Saturator to just give some more gain, and then enable the soft clip so we can get a little bit more volume, kind of just squeeze the dry and that reverb signal together, blend them and kind of mesh them into one. The EQ is really just to kind of tame and balance this out in the mix of everything. And then we have the filter to automate in certain parts of the arrangement, such as this breakdown and the buildup that we can see here. So this is what it sounds like all together. So the reverb makes all the difference here. And you might have noticed in the arrangement, we have another synth that comes in, and this is basically creating the same exact riff line. And I'm using Silent for this. And this is just a basic patch that I found here. And what I'm doing is just going a couple octaves higher. Just so that we actually have a little bit of lift happening in the second part, in the second half of this drop. So we have two layers of bass. We have a sub bass, and then we have this aggressive, dirty bass here that you can normally often hear in future rave music. So I'm going to start with the aggressive one first. It's got that Reese, that Hoover type bass. So let's go ahead and take some of the processing off and walk you through what we're doing there. This is also Serum. And this is just basically starting off with a sawtooth waveform and adding some of the unison voices. So where I'm at 3 voices here and just detuning that till I got the nice texture that I'm looking for. And then heading over to the effect, we're adding some distortion, have it set to the tube, using the compressor here. Just to make sure as any notes that might resonate a little bit more than the others, this is just going to give a nice controlled dynamic performance. And I'm just using this EQ to take away some of the top end. That's it. Then we really get a lot of the grit and dirt added when we use an amp simulator that we have here in Ableton Live. Notice that it's set to mono, so I want to make sure I don't lose that width. So I'm going to leave it and set it to dual. Put an EQ so we can take away some of the low end and leave that space for the sub bass. Now I have a reverb inserted directly onto the synth, and we're going to repeat that same process. And this is a big staple in this genre of music, and that is sidechaining the reverb to the lead source of the actual synth. So in this case, bass, that second bass is going to be the source that ducks the reverb. So when the bass stops playing, you hear that nice epic reverb take place and take precedence. And that's what we're trying to do here. And for this, you really have to kind of dial in the threshold a little bit to get the right blend that you're looking for. And then we're using that same kickstart here to create some of that pulse. Then I have the kick and the sub bass layered together. I'm going to tell you why. Here we have the sub bass first, which is just a basic sawtooth. No unison, set to mono, and just brought the filter all the way down. I'm also using an amp simulator here. This one's set to mono, and this is set to the bass amplifier, and just using EQ to cut any high end off. But this bass in particular is going to get sidechained to the kick drum. So I have the kick drum right above that. Now here's a principle that you can also use in any type of genre that music that you're creating, and that's understanding when and the why behind what to do when it comes to compressing your kick and your bass. I particularly wanted to compress the kick and bass together, so that's why I grouped them together, the sub, bass, and the kick, because it just felt a little detached. They just felt a little bit detached from one another, and so putting them together and then compressing the two of them with a multi-band dynamic compressor really helped to glue them together. So I'm going to play this This is just the kick and the sub bass together without the multi-band dynamic. That low end really just kind of lifts up a little bit, and the kick still keeps its presence, but yet the bass now feels a little bit more undetached from it. It actually feels more glued to the kick. So what's going on is, in this multi-band dynamic, I made sure the highs are set to 600 hertz, and I put the low at around 110 hertz. And I'm just kind of dialing back the compression here, the ratio, and the threshold till I felt that detachment leave and have the sub and the kick more glued together. Once I heard that, when I started dialing in these knobs and boosting up the makeup gain, once I heard that, then I was like, okay, this is really helpful. This is what I was going for. And then using a saturator to just give nice beef. This is another way to actually kind of glue them together as well with having that saturator. So over here, I duplicated the same buildup and drop so I can spotlight a different type of synth that is also normally found in this genre of music. So let me just play you a little bit. So this is a bit more of that epicness that's going on. And it's the same type of vibe here that we've got with the lead here. So we've got a Serum performing the lead, and that is oscillator A and B set to a sawtooth, and really just cranking up the unison here and giving it that nice wide depth, and putting the filter on, not shaving too much of that because we do want it to be bright. Distorting it, I'm going back to diode 1 here, and just creating a little bit of depth here with the dimension. And that's really it, because once you have this big synth here, it's just all about that sawtooth, just that grittiness that comes from that. And then duplicating it again on top so that I have the same riff playing with the noise, just as we did earlier. So we've got that as well. So I'm going to duplicate this part here and play these together. Well, I hope the tips I've shared in this video have been helpful and inspiring you to use them and implement them in your projects. And if you're serious about wanting to produce your own music and you're looking for professional guidance to help you take your next step with your music production, then I want to encourage you to visit beatacademy.com. As a matter of fact, I want to take this moment to highlight some of the wins from some of my Beat Academy members. I want to specifically highlight Beat Academy member Riva. Before joining Beat Academy, she was a bit overwhelmed with the whole self-recording and production process. But after becoming a member for several years, she's been able to write, self-produce, and release her first song, which became a semi-finalist in Nashville's Music City Songwriter Competition. Color on the Walls, her project, also caught the attention of producers in Nashville who turned out to be the producer of her dreams. And they've been working together remotely for almost 1.5 years now. She went from 0 fans to having a growing fan base and started to sell merch. And Color on the Walls has achieved over 3,000 streams on Spotify since its release. Additionally, her new song, State of Mind, is coming up on 1,000 streams in a matter of 1 month. She's also increased confidence in musical abilities and exponential growth in both the music and the business side of things. And she actually got to nail her first job doing some vocal work for a TV ad that I was able to send her way as becoming a Beat Academy member. So super excited about everything going on inside the Beat Academy community and all the members that are achieving the success that they're looking for. If you're interested and want more details, then venture over to beatacademy.com for more information. Be sure to subscribe to this video so you can stay up to date with upcoming videos, and I'll see you soon.